Hello, bored people, and welcome back to Muted History. I'm here with another deep dive into the technologies that shaped our world, and tonight we're exploring something that fundamentally changed the trajectory of human civilization. Not through grand declarations or royal decrees, but through a quiet revolution that began in the hands of our ancestors over 70,000 years ago. We're talking about the bow and arrow. And before you click away thinking this is just another history lesson about old weapons, let me tell you something that might surprise you. This simple combination of bent wood and string didn't just change how humans hunted, it rewrote the rules of warfare, reshaped entire societies, and established patterns of technological innovation that we still follow today. The bow and arrow was humanity's first precision instrument, our first attempt at turning physics itself into a tool of survival and conquest. So settle in, dim the lights if you need to, and let me tell you the story of how a curved piece of wood became the foundation upon which empires were built and fell. To understand the true significance of the bow and arrow, we need to travel back to a time when humanity faced constraints that seem almost unimaginable today. Picture our ancestors 70,000 years ago, scattered across the African continent in small nomadic bands. These weren't the primitive cave dwellers of popular imagination, but sophisticated hunters and gatherers who understood their environment with an intimacy we can barely comprehend today. They carried everything they owned, fire carefully preserved in hollow gourds like captured sunlight, stone tools, each one shaped through countless hours of patient work, spears with points that had been crafted with the precision of art. And they carried knowledge, passed down through generations in stories that held the accumulated wisdom of survival. But there was a fundamental limitation that haunted every hunt, every attempt to secure food for their families. They had to get close, dangerously close. When you're hunting with a spear or throwing stick, 30 feet might as well be 30 miles. The mathematics of survival were cruel and simple. To eat, you had to enter the killing range of whatever you were trying to kill. Imagine the frustration. You're crouched behind rocks at dawn, watching a herd of antelope grazing just beyond your reach, close enough to see their breath in the morning air, close enough to smell their musk on the wind, but they know the geometry of death as well as you do. They've learned through countless generations to fear the scent of human skin, the glint of stone points, the whisper of approaching feet. They graze at the very edge of spear range, like dancers at the edge of a cliff, never quite close enough, never quite safe. So our ancestors became masters of patience. They dug pits lined with sharpened stakes, covered them with branches woven so carefully that even the wisest buck would step confidently to his death. They learned to drive herds toward cliff faces using fire and noise and the landscape itself as weapons. They became the earth, moved like wind, struck like lightning, but always they had to get close. And in those quiet moments when the hunt was finished, and the fire burned low, and the stars wheeled overhead, did they ever wonder? Did they look up at those streaks of light sometimes flashing through the night sky? Did they watch birds in flight and envy their ability to cover distance without effort? Did they notice the way tree branches bent and snapped back, filing that observation away in some corner of consciousness, waiting for the moment when need and knowledge would finally collide? The answer came from a place that still guards its secrets like sleeping dragons. In South Africa, at a site called Sibudu Cave, perched on a cliff face above a river whose name whispers ancient secrets. For over 100,000 years, humans had sought shelter in this sacred hollow. Generation upon generation, building their fires in the same space, leaving behind the archaeology of survival that built up over millennia like sedimentary stone made from human dreams. But it was in the layers dating back 70,000 years that archaeologists discovered something that would rewrite our understanding of human ingenuity. Not crude, heavy points hammered roughly from stone, but delicate works of art that would challenge modern craftsmen. Arrowheads, each one shaped with such precision that every edge curved exactly where it needed to curve, every point tapered to mathematical perfection. These weren't spear points. They were too small, too light, too carefully balanced. They were designed not to be thrust by hand, but to fly through air. Someone 70,000 years ago had solved the fundamental problem that had plagued human hunters since the species began. Someone had figured out how to kill from a distance. The first archer remains nameless, lost in the mists of deep time. But we can imagine them. Perhaps a young hunter frustrated by too many failed stalks, or an elder whose throwing arm had begun to weaken with age, maybe someone whose mind simply worked differently, who saw possibility where others saw only limitation. Picture them sitting by the fire one evening, absently bending a green branch between their hands, feeling it flex and resist. Notice how it wanted to spring back to its original shape when released, storing energy in its fibers like a coiled snake, waiting to strike. Perhaps they tied sinew from yesterday's kill between the two ends of the branch and plucked it, listening to the deep thrumming note it produced, the first song ever sung by a bowstring. Or maybe the inspiration came from watching children play with small spears, trying to see who could throw them farthest. Our unnamed inventor might have noticed that the lightest spears flew farthest and began to wonder, what if we could make them even lighter? What if we didn't have to depend on arm strength alone? What if we could borrow power from the wood itself? However it happened, the moment of realization must have been electric. The sudden understanding that a bent stick could store energy, that a string could hold tension, that this tension could be transferred to a small projectile and send it flying farther and faster than any human arm could throw it. This wasn't just manual dexterity. This was abstract thinking of the highest order. The first bow was probably crude, a simple arc of green wood with a string of twisted plant fibre or animal sinew. The first arrows were likely just sharpened sticks, perhaps with their points hardened in fire. But even in this primitive form, the weapon represented a revolution that would ripple through history like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Because with the bow came something more than just a new hunting tool. It brought a new relationship between human and environment, hunter and prey, intention and result. For the first time in human history, we could strike at a distance. We could remain hidden while our will manifested itself in the world. We could send our intention flying through space like a prayer made physical, carrying death or food or safety across the gulf that had always separated want from having. The bow taught us that we could bend the world to our purposes, not through brute force alone, but through understanding, through seeing the hidden potential in simple materials and coaxing that potential into manifestation, through patience and practice, and the slow accumulation of skill that transforms fumbling attempts into fluid mastery. And once the first arrow flew true to its target, once the first distant kill proved that this strange new weapon actually worked, the secret began to spread. From cave to cave, tribe to tribe, carried by trade and warfare, and the simple human hunger to possess whatever advantage might mean the difference between survival and starvation. Within a few thousand years, a mere blink of an eye in the vast timeline of human existence, bow technology had spread across Africa like wildfire. Each group that encountered it added their own innovations, their own improvements, their own understanding of how to make this miracle of physics work even better. Some discovered that certain woods worked better than others, that yew was superior to oak, that bamboo could be split and laminated to create bows of incredible power. Others learned that the string mattered as much as the stave, that sinew from different animals produced different results, that the way the string was twisted and treated could mean the difference between a bow that lasted years and one that snapped on the third shot. And slowly, patiently, through trial and error and countless small discoveries, the bow evolved from a simple bent stick into something approaching the elegant weapon we recognize today. A weapon that would eventually spread to every corner of the inhabited world, that would shape the course of human civilization in ways its inventors could never have imagined. But all of that lay in the future. For now, in the caves of Sibudu, the revolution was just beginning. The first archer was drawing back the first bowstring, feeling the wood bend and store its potential energy, aiming at a target that had always been just out of reach. And when they released that string, when the first arrow flew singing through the air to strike home with deadly precision, they changed everything. They gave humanity wings. They taught us how to make our will manifest at a distance. They showed us that the impossible was just another problem waiting for the right solution. The age of the archer had begun, and with it, the long journey toward understanding that human ingenuity could transcend the limitations nature seemed to impose. This was more than innovation. This was transformation. And it was only the beginning of a story that would reshape not just how humans hunted, but how they fought, how they organized their societies, and ultimately, how they came to dominate the planet itself. The physics of what happened next is almost mystical when you think about it. Here was humanity taking the simplest materials imaginable and transforming them into something that could store and release energy with deadly precision. When that first archer drew back their bowstring, they weren't just bending wood. They were collaborating with forces that govern the fundamental behavior of matter itself. Think about the miracle of it, a piece of wood cut from a living tree and carved until it becomes something that can capture the strength of human muscle and release it in a concentrated burst of power. The bow is essentially a spring, but a spring made of organic material that remembers its original shape and fights to return to it. When you draw back the string, you're forcing the wood into an unnatural configuration, storing potential energy in its fibers like water filling a reservoir. This stored energy wants to escape. The wood yearns to spring back to its resting position. The only thing preventing this release is the archer's grip on the string, human will holding natural force in check, waiting for the precise moment when control becomes liberation. And when that moment comes, when the fingers open and the string snaps forward, physics takes over. The stored energy transfers to the string, which transfers it to the arrow, accelerating the projectile from 0 to over 100 miles per hour. In creating this system required our ancestors to understand principles fraction of a second. But that wouldn't be formally described by science for thousands of years. They had to grasp intuitively that different woods have different elastic properties, that some materials store energy more efficiently than others. They had to learn through experimentation that the thickness of the bow affected not just its power, but its durability. Too thin would break under stress, while too thick would be sluggish and inefficient. The string presented its own challenges. Plant fibers could be woven together to create strong cord, but they stretched and weakened when wet. Animal sinew was stronger and more consistent, but had to be carefully prepared and twisted to achieve the right balance of strength and flexibility. The connection between string and wood had to be absolutely secure. There's no margin for error when you're dealing with forces that can drive an arrow through an animal's ribs. And then there was the arrow itself, a marvel of engineering that required its own set of discoveries. Length mattered. Too short and the arrow would lack stability in flight. Too long and it would be unwieldy and prone to wobbling. Weight distribution was crucial. The balance point had to be just forward of center for proper flight characteristics. The nock where the arrow sits on the string had to be carved with precision to ensure clean release. Most critically, our ancestors had to discover fletching, the art of attaching feathers to the rear of the arrow to stabilize its flight. Without fletching, arrows tumble and veer unpredictably through the air. With proper fletching, they fly straight and true, spinning slightly as they travel in a way that keeps them on course. They learned that feathers from the same wing of a bird work better than mixed feathers, that the angle of attachment affects the arrow's spin, that even the type of glue used to secure the fletching can influence performance. Each discovery built upon the last, creating an accumulated body of knowledge that transformed crude projectiles into precision instruments. The arrowhead itself required understanding that wouldn't be surpassed for millennia. Working with stone tools, ancient craftsmen learned to knap flint and obsidian into points so sharp they could split hairs. They understood that the shape of the point affected both penetration and the wound it would create, that barbed points were harder to remove, but also harder to manufacture. They developed adhesives that could withstand impact and weather, mixing tree resins with ash and other materials to create glues that held under stress. They learned to wrap the hafting area with sinew cord in patterns that distributed stress and prevented the shaft from splitting. They discovered that heating the shaft slightly before inserting the point made for a tighter fit that would last longer. All of this knowledge accumulated slowly, passed from master to apprentice in the time-honored way of craft traditions. A young archer would spend years learning not just how to shoot, but how to make and maintain their equipment. They learned to select the right wood by examining the grain, to test moisture content by feel, to judge the quality of sinew by its colour and texture. They learned the patience required to season wood properly. Too green and it would warp and crack, too old and it would become brittle. They learned to work with the natural properties of materials rather than against them, to see the bow that wanted to emerge from a particular piece of wood rather than forcing an inappropriate design upon unwilling material. And gradually, through this accumulation of knowledge and skill, the bow evolved from a simple, bent stick into something approaching technological sophistication. Different cultures developed different styles based on available materials and hunting needs. Some created recurved bows where the tips curved forward to store more energy in a shorter frame. Others developed composite bows that layered different materials to optimize performance: sinew on the back for tension, wood in the core for structure, horn on the belly for compression. Each innovation built upon the fundamental insight that had emerged from those first experiments. That human intelligence could partner with natural forces to extend human capability far beyond its biological limits. The bow was proof that we didn't have to accept the constraints of our physical form, that through understanding and ingenuity we could transcend our limitations and achieve the seemingly impossible. When an archer draws back their bow and releases an arrow that flies true to its target, they participate in a conversation that began 70,000 years ago. They add their voice to a dialogue between human will and natural law that has continued unbroken across every generation since that first unknown inventor bent their first stick and heard the first song of string and wood. But the real revolution wasn't just in the weapon itself, it was in what the weapon made possible. For the first time in human history, we had created a tool that fundamentally altered the balance of power between humans and the natural world. No longer were we limited by the reach of our arms or the strength of our muscles. We had learned to store energy, to release it with precision, to strike from distances that seemed impossible to earlier generations. This wasn't just about hunting anymore. This was about projection of force, about the ability to impose human will across space and time, about turning intention into reality through the marriage of physics and craftsmanship. The implications would ripple through every aspect of human civilization for millennia to come. Consider what this meant for early human communities. Suddenly, hunting parties could be smaller and more mobile. A single skilled archer could bring down game that had previously required coordinated group efforts. Prey animals that had learned to avoid humans at spear range were now vulnerable to attacks from previously safe distances. The fundamental equations of survival had changed, and human communities found themselves with new opportunities and new challenges. The social implications were profound. Archery required different skills than spear hunting. Less physical strength, but more fine motor control. Less raw aggression, but more patience and precision. This opened up hunting roles to individuals who might not have been suited to close quarters combat with dangerous prey. The elderly, whose accumulated wisdom was valuable, but whose physical strength was declining, could remain productive hunters long after they could no longer wield heavy spears effectively. The bow was becoming a great equalizer, making success dependent more on skill and practice than on brute physical capability. This democratization of hunting had ripple effects throughout early human societies. Communities with more skilled archers could support larger populations, could venture into territories that had been too dangerous to exploit effectively, could accumulate surpluses that led to the development of more complex social structures. The weapon also began to change the nature of human conflict. When disputes arose between competing groups, warfare was no longer just a matter of close-quarters combat with clubs and spears. Archers could strike from ambush, could defend positions that would have been impossible to hold with melee weapons alone. The tactical implications were enormous and would continue to evolve over thousands of years. Perhaps most importantly, the bow represented humanity's first clear example of engineering, the conscious design and construction of a device that performed better than anything nature had provided. It demonstrated that careful observation, patient experimentation, and gradual refinement could produce tools that dramatically extended human capability. It showed that we were not limited to using the world as we found it, but could reshape it to serve our purposes. This lesson would be applied again and again throughout human history. The same patient, methodical approach that produced the bow would eventually give us agriculture, metallurgy, architecture, and all the other technologies that separate human civilization from the natural world. The bow was perhaps our first proof of concept for technological development, showing that human intelligence could be applied systematically to solve problems and extend capabilities. As the technology spread from community to community across the ancient world, it carried with it not just the knowledge of how to make and use bows and arrows, but the more fundamental understanding that human intelligence could reshape the world. It planted the seeds of the technological mindset that would eventually transform the entire planet. In caves and shelters across Africa, Asia, Europe, and eventually the Americas, people began to look at the world around them with new eyes. If wood could be bent to store energy, if strings could transfer that energy to projectiles, if arrows could be made to fly straight and true, what other possibilities lay hidden in the materials and forces of the natural world, waiting for human ingenuity to discover and harness them? The age of technology had begun, and it started with a simple curve of wood and a taut string singing its ancient song of human potential realized. But understanding how the bow changed everything means following its journey beyond those first successful experiments in African caves, because once humanity had tasted the power of distance killing, there was no going back. The knowledge spread like ripples across water, carried by the ancient networks of human movement that connected distant communities long before roads or maps existed. Picture the world 50,000 years ago. Not empty wilderness, but a vast web of human communities scattered like stars across the darkness. Connected not by highways or written messages, but by something far more elemental. The pathways worn smooth by countless feet, following rivers and mountain passes, and seasonal hunting grounds. Along these ancient routes travelled more than just people and goods. Ideas moved too, the secrets of fire-making, techniques for shaping stone, stories that preserved cultural memory. And slowly, inevitably, the revolutionary technology of the bow and arrow. It began with a single, successful hunt. Imagine traders arriving at a distant camp, carrying not just goods for exchange, but stories of a miraculous new weapon they had witnessed. They spoke in hushed, excited voices around evening fires, describing arrows that flew farther than any spear could be thrown, that struck with deadly precision from impossible distances. At first, listeners might have been skeptical. Every hunter has heard tales that grow larger with each telling, but these traders carried proof. small, delicate arrowheads, so different from the heavy points used on thrusting spears. Within days, the most innovative hunters in the camp were experimenting, trying to recreate this miraculous weapon from fragments of description and samples of arrows. Most early attempts probably failed. The physics of the bow aren't immediately obvious, and mastering the craft requires not just understanding, but patient practice. But humans are persistent learners, and the advantages of ranged warfare were too obvious to ignore. Eventually, through trial and error, and the gradual accumulation of small discoveries, someone would succeed in creating a functional bow. And once they had succeeded, once they had proven that the stories were true, the knowledge would spread like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. This process repeated itself across Africa over thousands of years. Each successful adoption led to further refinement and innovation. Different communities developed different solutions to common problems, creating a rich diversity of bow designs and arrow types. Some cultures specialized in small, precise bows, perfect for hunting birds and small game. Others developed powerful weapons capable of bringing down large animals. The technology wasn't just copied, it was adapted, improved, localized. Communities that lived in forests developed short, maneuverable bows that could be used effectively in thick vegetation. Those who hunted on the open plains created longer, more powerful weapons capable of extreme range and penetration. Each environment demanded its own solutions, and human ingenuity rose to meet those demands. By around 15,000 years ago, this process of cultural diffusion had carried bow technology to every inhabited continent except Australia, where the spear thrower remained the preferred ranged weapon. The speed of this spread is remarkable when you consider it occurred entirely through human-to-human contact, without any form of mass communication or organized dissemination. But the spread of the bow was more than just the movement of technology. It was the propagation of a new way of thinking about human capability. Each community that adopted the bow had to grapple with its implications, had to reorganize their hunting strategies and social structures around this new capability. Suddenly, a single skilled archer could bring down game that had previously required coordinated group efforts. Hunting parties could be smaller and more mobile. Prey animals that had learned to avoid humans at spear range were suddenly vulnerable to attacks from previously safe distances. The fundamental balance between hunter and hunted had shifted, and human communities found themselves with new opportunities and new challenges. The social implications were profound and far-reaching. Archery required different skills than spear hunting, less physical strength but more fine motor control, less raw aggression but more patience and precision. This opened up hunting roles to individuals who might not have been suited to close-quarters combat with dangerous prey. The elderly, whose accumulated wisdom was valuable but whose physical strength was declining, could remain productive hunters long after they could no longer wield heavy spears effectively. Women, typically excluded from the most dangerous hunting activities, found that archery offered opportunities for participation that had been closed to them before. The bow was a great equalizer in many ways, making success dependent more on skill and practice than on brute physical capability. This democratization of hunting had ripple effects throughout early human societies. Communities with more skilled archers could support larger populations, could venture into territories that had been too dangerous to exploit effectively, could accumulate surpluses that led to the development of more complex social structures. The bow also changed the nature of human conflict. Warfare, when it occurred between competing groups, was no longer just a matter of close-quarters combat with clubs and spears. Archers could strike from ambush, could defend positions that would have been impossible to hold with melee weapons alone. The tactical implications were enormous and would continue to evolve over thousands of years. But perhaps most importantly, the bow represented proof of concept for human technological development. It demonstrated that careful observation, patient experimentation, and gradual refinement could produce tools that dramatically extended human capability. It showed that we were not limited to using the world as we found it, but could reshape it to serve our purposes. This lesson would be applied again and again throughout human history. The same patient, methodical approach that produced the bow would eventually give us agriculture, metallurgy, architecture, and all the other technologies that separate human civilization from the natural world. The bow was perhaps the first clear example of human engineering, the conscious design and construction of a device that performed better than anything nature had provided. And as the technology spread from community to community across the ancient world, it carried with it not just the knowledge of how to make and use bows and arrows, but the more fundamental understanding that human intelligence could be applied systematically to solve problems and extend capabilities. It planted the seeds of the technological mindset that would eventually reshape the entire planet. In caves and shelters across Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas, people began to look at the world around them with new eyes. Wood could be bent to store energy. Strings could transfer that energy to projectiles. Arrows could be made to fly straight and true. What other possibilities lay hidden in the materials and forces of the natural world, waiting for human ingenuity to discover and harness them? The age of technology had begun, and it started with a simple curve of wood and a taut string singing its ancient song of human potential realized. But this was just the foundation. What came next would transform not just individual communities, but entire civilizations. The bow was about to become something far more than a hunting tool. It was about to become an instrument of empire. As bow technology matured and spread, something fascinating happened. Different cultures began pushing the basic design in radically different directions, each innovation reflecting the unique needs and materials of their environment. In the forests of northern Europe, craftsmen developed longbows from yew wood, weapons of incredible power that could drive arrows through armor at ranges that seemed impossible. In the steppes of Central Asia, nomadic peoples created composite bows, layering horn, wood, and sinew into compact weapons that could be used effectively from horseback. These bows were marvels of engineering, storing more energy per inch than almost any other design. They were also incredibly complex to manufacture, requiring skills that took decades to master and materials that had to be gathered from across vast territories. In the Americas, isolated from old world developments, indigenous peoples developed their own unique solutions. Pacific Northwest cultures created bows from whalebone and sinew, perfectly adapted to their maritime environment. Plains tribes developed powerful wooden bows capable of bringing down buffalo, while forest peoples created smaller, more maneuverable weapons suited to hunting in dense vegetation. Each of these designs represented thousands of years of accumulated knowledge and refinement. Master bowyers guarded their secrets jealously, passing techniques down through family lines that stretched back generations. The knowledge of which trees to select, how to season the wood, which animals provided the best sinew, how to layer composite materials for maximum efficiency. All of this was cultural treasure, as valuable as gold or precious stones. But with this specialization came vulnerability. A culture that had perfected one type of bow might find itself at a severe disadvantage when facing enemies who had developed different solutions. The short, powerful composite bows of steppe nomads were devastating when used by mounted archers against infantry formations. But those same nomads could be outranged by English longbowmen in the right circumstances. This created a kind of technological arms race that would continue for thousands of years. Each innovation in bow design sparked counter-innovations in armor and tactics. The development of plate armor in medieval Europe was partly a response to the increasing power and accuracy of archery. Castle designers began incorporating features specifically intended to neutralize archer attacks. Military engineers developed new approaches to siege warfare that took account of the threat posed by massed archery. The social structures that supported advanced archery also became more complex and specialized. Creating a master archer required not just individual training, but entire communities organized around supporting that training. English longbowmen, for instance, began their education in childhood, spending years developing the enormous upper body strength required to draw their powerful weapons. This created what amounted to a military caste system in some societies. Professional archers who devoted their lives to perfecting their craft, supported by networks of bowyers, fletchers, and other specialists who provided the equipment and training necessary for effectiveness. The economic investment required was enormous, but so were the military advantages it provided. Communities that could afford to maintain large numbers of skilled archers found themselves with decisive advantages over their neighbours. They could project force across greater distances, could defend territories that would have been impossible to hold with conventional weapons, could strike at enemies who had no effective means of retaliation. This began to reshape political structures in fundamental ways. Military power, which had previously been distributed fairly evenly across populations, began to concentrate in the hands of those who could afford the most advanced archery technology and training. Kingdoms rose and fell based partly on their ability to field effective archer units. The bow was becoming more than just a weapon. It was becoming an organizing principle for entire civilizations, a technology so powerful that it reshaped everything around it: social structures, economic systems, political organizations, even religious beliefs began to reflect the realities of a world where a skilled archer could kill at distances that had once seemed magical. And this was still just the beginning. Because as human societies became more complex and more competitive, the bow would evolve again, becoming not just a tool of individual warfare, but an instrument of mass destruction. The age of military archery was about to dawn, and with it would come innovations that would make the simple hunting bows of our ancestors seem like children's toys in comparison. The transformation was gradual, but inexorable. What had begun as a solution to the problem of hunting at distance was becoming something far more sophisticated and far more dangerous. The bow was about to teach humanity some of its hardest lessons about the relationship between technological capability and political power, about the ways that innovations in warfare reshape entire civilizations, and about the eternal arms race between those who seek to project force and those who seek to defend against it. Human ingenuity, once unleashed, has a tendency to exceed all expectations, and the story of how a simple hunting bow became an instrument of empire is a perfect example of that tendency in action. The bow's journey, from hunting tool to instrument of war, wasn't a sudden transformation. It was more like watching a river gradually carve through stone, reshaping the landscape one grain at a time, until suddenly you realize the entire geography has changed. And nowhere is this transformation more dramatically illustrated than in the rise of the world's first great archery civilizations. Let's start in ancient Egypt, where around 3,000 years before the Common Era, pharaohs began to understand something that would reshape the nature of warfare itself. The bow wasn't just a weapon. It was a force multiplier that could turn a small group of skilled warriors into something approaching a natural disaster. Egyptian military texts from this period read like instruction manuals for systematic destruction. They describe formations of archers arranged in precise geometric patterns, each man trained to loose arrows not as individuals, but as components in a vast machine designed to rain death from the sky. These weren't the scattered shots of hunters hoping to bring down a single deer. This was concentrated firepower on a scale that the world had never seen before. The Egyptians developed what we might recognize today as the first true military-industrial complex built around archery. Entire cities were organized around the production of bows and arrows. Specialized workshops where master craftsmen spent their lives perfecting composite bow designs that layered horn, wood, and sinew into weapons of incredible power. Quality control systems that ensured arrows from different fletchers would perform consistently when used in massed formations. But it was the training systems that really revolutionized warfare. Egyptian archers weren't just taught to shoot accurately, they were drilled in coordinated volleys, taught to adjust their aim based on commands from officers who could observe the battle from elevated positions. They learned to maintain steady rates of fire for hours at a time, to shift their targets rapidly as battlefield conditions changed, to work as components in a larger tactical system. The psychological impact of facing these organized archer formations was devastating. Imagine being an enemy soldier advancing across open ground, watching the sky literally darken with incoming arrows. The sound alone was reportedly enough to break the morale of inexperienced troops. Contemporary accounts describe battles where enemy formations broke and fled before any physical contact had occurred, simply because they couldn't endure the psychological pressure of sustained arrow fire. Egyptian commanders understood that breaking enemy morale was often more effective than inflicting casualties, and they organized their archery tactics accordingly. Concentrated volleys fired at precise moments for maximum shock effect, sustained harassment designed to wear down enemy resolve, precision shooting to eliminate key leaders and disrupt command structures. But the Egyptians were just the beginning. As knowledge of organized archery spread through trade and conquest, other civilizations began developing their own innovations. The Assyrians took military archery to levels that bordered on the terrifying. Assyrian archers were renowned throughout the ancient world, not just for their skill, but for their systematic approach to warfare. They developed specialized arrows for different tactical purposes, bodkin points designed to penetrate the finest armor, broadheads that created devastating wounds in unprotected targets, fire arrows for siege warfare, even arrows designed to make specific sounds in flight, allowing commanders to communicate with units across the chaos of battle. Assyrian siege tactics relied heavily on archery in ways that would influence military thinking for centuries. Archers provided covering fire for siege engines, suppressed defenders on city walls, and maintained constant pressure throughout lengthy sieges. They developed mobile shields and protective screens that allowed their bowmen to work effectively even under counterfire. Perhaps most importantly, the Assyrians were among the first to use archery in systematic psychological warfare. They understood that fear could be as effective as physical destruction in achieving military objectives. The sight of thousands of arrows whistling through the air, the constant threat of death from an invisible enemy, these became weapons of the mind as much as the body. But it was the Persian Empire that truly demonstrated archery's potential to reshape the balance of power between civilizations. Persian military doctrine integrated mounted archers into combined arms tactics that could dominate conventional infantry forces across vast distances. These weren't just individual warriors on horseback. They were components in mobile artillery systems that could appear as if from nowhere, devastate enemy formations, and disappear before effective retaliation was possible. Persian archery tactics relied on mobility and the psychological impact of facing an enemy that could strike from any direction without warning. Their composite bows, perfected over centuries of steppe warfare, could drive arrows through armor at ranges that made conventional weapons useless. A Persian army could maintain pressure on enemies for days or weeks, wearing down their supplies and morale while remaining essentially untouchable. The famous battles between Persians and Greeks illustrate perfectly how archery was reshaping military thinking. At Marathon and Thermopylae, Greek heavy infantry had to develop entirely new tactical approaches to deal with enemies who could kill them from distances they couldn't match. The Greeks won those battles, but only by neutralizing Persian archery advantages through superior positioning, armor, and sheer determination. These conflicts demonstrated something crucial about the relationship between technology and tactics. Superior weapons don't automatically guarantee victory, but they do force opponents to adapt or die. The Greeks survived their encounters with Persian archery by developing counter-strategies. Less adaptable civilizations simply disappeared from history. Meanwhile, in the vast grasslands of Central Asia, nomadic cultures were developing archery traditions that would prove even more transformative. The Scythians, Mongols, and other steppe peoples created what amounted to entire civilizations built around mounted archery. Every adult male was a potential warrior, trained from childhood in the use of the composite bow from horseback. These nomadic archery systems were remarkable for their efficiency and sustainability. Unlike the complex military hierarchies of settled civilizations, steppe cultures integrated warfare into daily life in ways that made maintaining large numbers of skilled archers relatively inexpensive. Herding and hunting provided constant practice with the same skills needed for warfare. The same mobility required for following herds across seasonal pastures translated directly into tactical advantages on the battlefield. When these nomadic archers turned their attention to conquest, the results were often catastrophic for their settled neighbours. The Hunnic invasions that helped destroy the Western Roman Empire demonstrated the continued effectiveness of mounted archery against conventional infantry forces. Attila's armies used tactics that had been perfected over centuries of steppe warfare. Rapid advances followed by concentrated arrow fire, feigned retreats that drew enemies into ambushes, mobility that made retaliation nearly impossible. But perhaps the most dramatic example of how archery could reshape civilizations came with the Mongol conquests of the 13th century. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, nomadic archery traditions that had been confined to the steppes suddenly exploded across the known world, creating the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Mongol military success wasn't just about superior individual archery skills, though those were certainly important. It was about organizational innovations that turned entire populations into mobile military forces. Every Mongol warrior was expected to maintain multiple horses, allowing armies to move at speeds that seemed impossible to their enemies. Supply systems were organized around mobility rather than fixed bases, allowing Mongol forces to campaign across vast distances without losing effectiveness. The Mongols also perfected what we might call total archery warfare. Their armies included not just mounted archers, but siege specialists who could construct and operate archery-based siege engines, engineers who could adapt their tactics to different terrain and enemy types, and intelligence networks that provided the information needed to coordinate campaigns across continents. Most importantly, the Mongols demonstrated how archery-based military systems could be scaled up to imperial levels without losing their essential characteristics. Unlike the complex hierarchical armies of settled civilizations, Mongol forces retained their mobility and flexibility even when operating on massive scales. This allowed them to conquer and control territories that would have been impossible to manage with conventional military systems. The Mongol example illustrates something profound about the relationship between military technology and political organization. The bow wasn't just a weapon that helped the Mongols conquer their enemies. It was an organizing principle that shaped their entire civilization. Social structures, economic systems, political institutions, even religious beliefs all reflected the realities of a culture built around mounted archery. This pattern repeated itself across the world as different cultures discovered how to integrate advanced archery into their military and social systems. In feudal Japan, the samurai class developed around mounted archery traditions that emphasized individual skill and personal honor. In medieval Europe, the rise of professional archer units, like the English longbowmen, created new forms of military organization that challenged traditional feudal hierarchies. Each of these developments represented more than just military innovation. They were examples of how a single technology, properly developed and systematically applied, could reshape entire civilizations. The bow had become a transformative force that influenced everything from social stratification to economic organization to political power structures, and this transformation was accelerating. As different archery traditions came into contact through trade and conquest, innovations spread rapidly across vast distances. Composite bow technologies developed on the Asian steppes found their way into European workshops. Training methods perfected by nomadic peoples were adapted by settled civilizations. Tactical innovations proven in one theatre of operations were quickly adopted in others. The result was a kind of global arms race that pushed archery technology and tactics to their absolute limits. By the high medieval period, the world's great powers were fielding archer units that represented the culmination of thousands of years of accumulated knowledge and refinement. These weren't just individual warriors with bows, they were components in sophisticated military systems that could project power across continents and reshape the balance of power between entire civilizations. But with this sophistication came vulnerability. The more complex and specialized these archery systems became, the more resources they required to maintain. The more they depended on specific materials, training methods, and tactical doctrines, the more susceptible they became to disruption by new technologies or changing circumstances. The seeds of archery's eventual obsolescence were already being planted in the very success of its military applications, because the same pressures that had driven the development of ever more powerful bows and more effective arrows were also working to produce weapons that would eventually make archery obsolete on the battlefield. The age of gunpowder was approaching, bringing with it new ways of thinking about warfare, technology, and the projection of power across distance, but that transformation still lay in the future. For now, in the high medieval period, the bow reigned supreme, its string song echoing across battlefields, from England to Japan, its arrows carrying not just death, but the promise of change. Human civilization had learned to harness the power of stored energy and directed force in ways that would have seemed magical to those first African archers 70,000 years ago. The simple bent stick and taut string had become the foundation upon which empires rose and fell, the organizing principle around which entire cultures structured themselves. And the most remarkable thing, this was still just the beginning of the bow's influence on human history, because even as military archery reached its peak, the weapon was already beginning its transformation into something entirely new. The principles it had taught about precision, practice, and the systematic development of human capability were about to find applications that would reshape not just warfare, but human consciousness itself. The age of the archer was far from over. It was simply preparing for its next evolution. The story of how precision became power begins in the workshops and training grounds where individual skill transformed into systematic excellence. By the 12th century, certain regions had developed archery traditions so refined, so devastatingly effective, that they would reshape the political landscape of entire continents. And nowhere was this more dramatically demonstrated than in the misty hills and valleys of medieval England, where a weapon emerged that would humble kings and rewrite the rules of warfare itself. The English longbow wasn't just an evolution of earlier designs. It was a revolution disguised as tradition. Standing as tall as a man, carved from a single piece of yew wood that might have taken decades to season properly, these weapons required draw weights that would seem impossible to modern archers. We're talking about forces exceeding 150 pounds, nearly twice what most people today could even attempt to pull. The men who wielded these weapons were living contradictions of medieval social order. They weren't knights born to privilege and trained from childhood in the arts of mounted combat. They were yeomen, farmers, craftsmen, common men who had transformed themselves into instruments of precision through nothing more than relentless practice and an understanding of their weapon that bordered on the mystical. An English longbowman could loose 12 arrows per minute with deadly accuracy at ranges exceeding 200 yards. But raw numbers don't capture the true horror of what these men could achieve when working in coordination. A formation of several thousand longbowmen could create what contemporary accounts described as storms of arrows that blotted out the sun. The sky would darken with incoming projectiles, each one guided by years of training and muscle memory that had become as natural as breathing. The Battle of Crécy in 1346 provided the world with its first glimpse of what this new form of warfare could accomplish. King Philip II of France had assembled what many considered the finest army in Europe, heavily armoured knights who represented the military elite of their age, mounted on destriers bred for war, carrying weapons forged by master craftsmen. They outnumbered the English by more than 2 to 1. By every conventional measure, the French should have won decisively. Instead, they were systematically annihilated by men they considered social inferiors. English archers, positioned behind protective stakes and supported by men-at-arms, turned the flower of French chivalry into a killing field. Knights who had spent fortunes on the finest armour available found themselves helpless against arrows that could punch through steel plate at distances that made retaliation impossible. The tactical implications were staggering. For centuries, heavy cavalry had dominated European battlefields through a combination of shock, mobility, and sheer intimidation. A charge of armoured knights was like a medieval tank assault, capable of breaking infantry formations through psychological impact as much as physical force. But at Crécy, those same knights found themselves trapped in muddy fields, unable to close with enemies who could kill them from impossible distances. This wasn't just a military defeat, it was the beginning of the end for an entire way of thinking about warfare and social organisation. The feudal system that had dominated medieval Europe was built around the military supremacy of mounted warriors who could afford the enormous costs of armour, weapons, and war horses. When that supremacy was shattered by common men with bows, everything else began to unravel as well. Agincourt in 1415 drove the lesson home with even more devastating clarity. Henry VIII's army, weakened by disease and vastly outnumbered, used terrain and archery to achieve one of the most lopsided victories in military history. French knights, trapped in muddy fields and unable to maneuver effectively, were systematically destroyed by arrow fire that penetrated even the finest armour of the period. But the true genius of English archery wasn't just in the weapons themselves, it was in the social and economic systems that supported them. While other nations tried to create professional archer units through expensive training programs, England integrated archery into the very fabric of rural life. Laws required regular practice with the bow and prohibited other games that might distract young men from developing their skills. This distributed approach to training meant that England could field thousands of skilled archers without the enormous costs that would have bankrupted other kingdoms. Village competitions, hunting expeditions, and seasonal festivals all became opportunities for archery practice. By the time a young Englishman was old enough for military service, he might have been shooting bows for a decade or more. The economic implications were just as revolutionary as the military ones. Archery was a skill that could be learned by anyone willing to invest the time and effort required. Unlike mounted combat, which demanded expensive horses and equipment available only to the wealthy, the bow was a relatively democratic weapon. This created opportunities for social mobility that had been largely absent from earlier military systems. English archers were often drawn from the yeoman class, free farmers and craftsmen who formed the backbone of rural society. Military service as an archer offered them opportunities for advancement and enrichment that would have been impossible in other occupations. Successful bowmen could earn substantial pay acquire land through military service, and even achieve minor noble status through exceptional performance. This democratization of military power contributed to broader social changes throughout England and eventually across Europe. As rulers recognized the military advantages of professional archer units, they began recruiting more broadly from their populations, offering training and equipment to men who could meet the physical and skill requirements. The longbow also drove rapid innovation in defensive technologies. Armor makers developed new techniques for creating steel plates that could deflect or stop arrows. Castle designers incorporated features specifically intended to neutralize archer attacks. Military engineers developed new approaches to siege warfare that took account of the threat posed by mass archery. But perhaps most importantly, the success of English archery established patterns of military thinking that would influence European warfare for centuries. The understanding that superior training and organization could overcome traditional advantages of birth and wealth. The recognition that technological innovation could upset established power relationships. The insight that the future belonged to those who could most effectively harness new capabilities to achieve their objectives. The longbow had become more than just a weapon. It was a catalyst for fundamental changes in how societies organized themselves for war and how they thought about the relationship between individual skill and collective power. It demonstrated that small numbers of highly trained specialists could achieve results that seemed impossible when measured against traditional metrics of military strength. Yet even as English archery reached its peak effectiveness, the forces that would eventually render it obsolete were already gathering strength. The same pressures that had driven the development of increasingly powerful bows and more effective arrows were working to produce weapons that would eventually make archery irrelevant on the battlefield. The first primitive firearms were already appearing in European arsenals, crude and unreliable devices that could barely match a skilled archer's range and accuracy. But these early guns carried within them the seeds of transformation. Unlike archery, which required years of training to master, firearms could be operated effectively by soldiers with minimal preparation. A peasant conscript could be taught to load and fire a musket in a matter of days, while creating an effective longbowman required the kind of long-term investment that few societies could afford on a massive scale. More importantly, gunpowder weapons offered something that no amount of archery training could provide: the ability to penetrate any armor ever made. The best plate armor of the late medieval period, crafted by master armorers using techniques refined over centuries, could turn aside even bodkin points from the most powerful longbows. But a musket ball, heavy and moving at tremendous velocity, could punch through steel plates as if they were made of paper. This capability fundamentally altered the strategic calculations that had governed warfare for millennia. Suddenly, the enormous investments that kingdoms had made in heavy cavalry and plate armor were rendered obsolete by weapons that could be mass-produced by relatively unskilled workers. The social structures that had been built around the military supremacy of armored elites began to crumble under pressure from technologies that democratized the ability to kill. The transition wasn't immediate or uniform. For decades, armies fielded both archers and gunners, using each weapon system for tasks suited to its particular strengths. Archers retained advantages in rate of fire, accuracy at moderate ranges, and reliability in wet weather that kept them valuable even as firearms improved. Some military theorists argued that bows would always have a place in warfare due to their silent operation and independence from gunpowder supplies. But the trajectory of technological development was clear. Each generation of firearms was more reliable, more powerful, and easier to use than the last. Manufacturing techniques improved to the point where muskets could achieve accuracy that rivaled the best archers. Most critically, the costs of gunpowder weapons decreased as production methods became more efficient and standardized. The social implications of this transition were profound and far-reaching. archery had been inherently aristocratic in its requirements. Only societies with significant leisure time and economic surplus could afford to maintain large numbers of skilled archers. Firearms, by contrast, could be operated by anyone capable of following simple instructions, opening military service to classes of people who had previously been excluded from combat roles. This democratization of warfare contributed to broader social and political changes that reshaped European civilization. Rulers who had depended on feudal levies and aristocratic heavy cavalry found themselves able to field professional armies recruited from the general population. The military balance shifted in favor of centralized states that could afford to equip large numbers of soldiers with standardized weapons. Traditional warrior elites found their military advantages neutralized by technological change. The economic implications were equally dramatic. The industries that had grown up around archery production gradually withered as demand for their products declined. Entire regions that had specialized in producing yew staves or high-quality arrows found their traditional exports becoming obsolete virtually overnight. New industries emerged to replace them. Gunpowder production required different skills and materials, creating opportunities for entrepreneurs who could master the chemistry of explosives. Firearms manufacturing demanded precision metalwork capabilities that drove innovation in metallurgy and machine tools. The logistics of supplying armies with gunpowder, shot, and spare parts created new forms of military contracting and international trade. The transformation also changed the nature of military training and organization. Archer units had required long-term investment in individual skill development, creating military specialists whose effectiveness depended on years of accumulated experience. Firearms units could be trained more quickly, but required different forms of organization to coordinate their fire effectively and maintain their equipment properly. The tactical implications rippled through every aspect of military science. Fortification design had to be completely reconceived to deal with weapons that could breach walls that had been impregnable for centuries. Military engineering became focused on artillery rather than siege engines. The pace of combat accelerated as weapons became more lethal and engagements became more decisive. Perhaps most poignantly, the decline of archery represented the end of a particular relationship between human capability and technological achievement. The longbow had represented the absolute pinnacle of what could be accomplished through the marriage of natural materials, human skill, and accumulated wisdom. It was a technology that enhanced human capability without replacing it, that required the archer to become part of the weapon system rather than simply operating it. Firearms represented a different philosophy of technology, one that emphasized mechanical reliability over human skill, standardization over individual excellence, industrial production over craftsmanship. The musketeer was an operator of machinery rather than a practitioner of art. The weapon's effectiveness depended on its design and manufacture, rather than on the user's training and experience. This shift marked a crucial turning point in the relationship between humans and their tools. For the first time, military effectiveness became dependent more on technological superiority than on individual or collective human capability. The implications of this change would continue to unfold over subsequent centuries as technology became increasingly sophisticated and human operators became increasingly peripheral to military systems. Yet the end of military archery wasn't complete abandonment. The skills and knowledge that had been developed over millennia of bow use found new applications in hunting, sport, and ceremonial contexts. Archery persisted as a form of recreation and competition, preserving techniques and traditions that might otherwise have been lost entirely. More importantly, the principles that had been learned through archery development continued to influence technological innovation in other fields. The understanding of materials science that had been developed through bow construction contributed to advances in metallurgy and engineering. The precision manufacturing techniques required for arrow production informed the development of industrial processes. The systematic approaches to training and skill development that had been refined through archery influenced educational and military training methods. The organizational lessons learned through managing archer units became fundamental principles of modern military organization. The economic understanding developed through supporting archery-based warfare informed approaches to military logistics and industrial mobilization that would prove crucial in later conflicts. In the end, the twilight of military archery represented not the death of a technology, but its transformation. The bow and arrow had taught humanity crucial lessons about the relationship between human capability and technological achievement, lessons that would prove invaluable as societies grappled with increasingly complex and powerful technologies. The last military archers drew their bows, knowing that they were practicing an art that would soon be relegated to historical curiosity, but they also carried forward traditions of precision, dedication, and systematic excellence that would continue to influence human development long after their weapons fell silent. The song of the string faded gradually rather than ending abruptly, its final notes echoing through centuries of human memory, reminding us that true technological achievement is never just about the tools themselves, but about the human wisdom and capability that brings those tools to life. In quiet moments when the wind moves through trees with a sound like bowstrings singing, we can still hear echoes of that ancient music. The song that taught us how to reach beyond our grasp and transform the impossible into the inevitable through patience, skill, and the accumulated wisdom of countless generations. And yet, even as the bow's military supremacy waned, its influence on human consciousness was far from over. Because embedded within those 70,000 years of development lay insights about precision, practice, and the systematic pursuit of excellence that would find new expression in contexts the first archers could never have imagined. The weapon that had built empires was about to begin its next transformation, from instrument of war to teacher of the human spirit. Human ingenuity, once unleashed, has a tendency to exceed all expectations, and the story of the bow and arrow was far from finished. It was simply preparing for its most unexpected chapter yet. The transformation from weapon of war to instrument of precision began in the most unlikely of places. Not on battlefields or in royal armories, but in the quiet courtyards of monasteries and the secluded gardens of philosophers. As gunpowder rendered military archery obsolete, something remarkable happened. The bow refused to disappear. Instead, it evolved into something entirely new, something that would teach humanity profound lessons about the nature of mastery itself. In feudal Japan, as the age of the samurai drew to a close, archery underwent a metamorphosis that would have seemed impossible to medieval European longbowmen. The Japanese had always understood that the bow was more than just a tool for killing. In their hands it became Kyudo, the way of the bow, a spiritual discipline that used the act of shooting not to hit targets, but to cultivate the soul. This wasn't just a change in application, it was a complete reimagining of what the bow could teach. Kyudo practitioners spent years learning not just how to draw and release, but how to breathe, how to stand, how to achieve a state of perfect balance between intention and surrender. The target became secondary to the process. What mattered wasn't whether the arrow hit its mark, but whether the archer had achieved harmony between mind, body, and spirit in the moment of release. The implications were revolutionary. For 70,000 years, archery had been about imposing human will upon the world, about making intention manifest through force and precision. But Kyudo flipped this relationship entirely. It used the bow to teach practitioners how to align themselves with larger forces, how to act without attachment to results, how to find stillness within motion. This transformation spread beyond Japan, taking different forms in different cultures, but carrying the same essential insight. In medieval Islamic courts, archery manuals appeared that were simultaneously technical guides and spiritual texts. They described the perfect archer as one whose heart was pure, whose intentions were aligned with divine will, whose arrows flew true because they had achieved inner harmony. European hunting traditions developed similar philosophies, though they expressed them differently. The gentleman archer of the Renaissance wasn't just someone who could hit a target. He was someone who embodied ideals of patience, discipline, and respect for the natural world. Archery became a form of character development, a way of cultivating virtues that extended far beyond the practice range. But perhaps the most profound transformation occurred in the realm of education and human development. The bow had always been a demanding teacher, requiring years of patient practice to master. But as military applications faded, educators began to recognize that these demands were actually archery's greatest gifts. The weapon became a laboratory for studying how humans learn complex skills, how they develop precision under pressure, how they integrate mind and body into unified action. Modern sports psychology owes enormous debts to insights first developed through archery training. The understanding of how to maintain focus under stress, how to coordinate complex physical movements with mental intention, how to achieve the kind of relaxed concentration that allows peak performance. These discoveries emerged from centuries of archery practice and continue to influence approaches to excellence in every field. The precision manufacturing techniques required for making arrows contributed to the development of quality control methods that became fundamental to industrial production. The idea that small variations in materials or construction could have large effects on performance was learned through arrow making long before it was applied to manufactured goods. The systematic testing methods used to evaluate arrow performance became models for product testing in countless other industries. But the bow's influence extended into even more unexpected territories. The mathematical understanding required for ballistics was first developed through archery. The need to understand trajectory, wind effects, and the relationship between force and accuracy led to investigations into physics that would eventually contribute to much more sophisticated analyses of projectile motion. The social and organizational lessons learned through managing archer units influenced military and civilian administration in ways that persist today. The understanding that effective organizations require not just individual competence, but systematic coordination, not just good equipment, but reliable supply chains, not just immediate capability, but long-term sustainability. These insights were first developed through the challenges of maintaining effective archery forces. The bow also provided early lessons in the economics of technological innovation. The enormous costs required to train and equip effective archers taught societies about the relationship between investment and capability, between short-term expense and long-term advantage. The trade-offs between different weapons systems provided case studies in technological choice that would inform decision-making about innovations throughout history. Perhaps most importantly, the bow and arrow established patterns of human innovation that continue to shape technological development today. The process of taking a simple natural phenomenon and gradually refining it into a sophisticated system through patient experimentation and accumulated knowledge became a template for technological advancement in countless other fields. The bow showed that transformative innovations often emerge not from sudden breakthroughs, but from the systematic improvement of existing capabilities. It demonstrated that the most powerful technologies are often those that work with, rather than against, natural principles. It proved that human intelligence applied persistently over long periods could achieve results that seemed impossible to earlier generations. In our current age of rapid technological change, these lessons remain profoundly relevant. As we grapple with artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, nanotechnology, and other transformative innovations, we can still learn from the wisdom accumulated through 70,000 years of bow development. The bow teaches us that true technological mastery requires not just understanding how tools work, but wisdom about when and how to use them. It reminds us that the most important innovations are often those that enhance rather than replace human capability. It shows us that sustainable technological development requires thinking not just about immediate capabilities, but about long-term consequences and requirements. Most fundamentally, the bow and arrow remind us that technology at its best is not separate from human nature, but an expression of it. The first archer who bent a stick and attached a string wasn't creating something alien to human experience, but discovering something that had always been latent within human possibility. In every arrow that flies true to its target, we see reflected the human capacity for precision, patience, and the transformation of simple materials into extraordinary capability. In every bowstring song, we hear echoes of the same creativity and ingenuity that continues to drive human innovation today. The bow's legacy lives on not just in museums and sporting events, but in the fundamental patterns of human technological development that it helped establish. Every time we pick up a new tool and work to master it, every time we practice a skill until it becomes second nature, every time we seek to extend our reach beyond our immediate grasp, we follow paths first traced by ancient archers whose dedication to excellence continues to inspire us across the centuries. The computer programmers who debug complex software apply the same systematic patience that ancient fletchers used to perfect their arrows. The athletes who train for Olympic competition follow training methodologies that can be traced back to archery masters who understood the relationship between preparation and performance. The architects who design buildings that stand for centuries use principles of stress and material science first explored by bowmakers who needed to understand how wood behaves under extreme forces. The musicians who spend years perfecting their technique engage with the same questions about practice, mastery, and the coordination of intention with physical expression that challenged every archer who ever drew a bow. Even meditation teachers who guide students towards states of focused awareness draw upon insights first systematically developed through archery practice. The understanding that peak performance requires a state of relaxed concentration, that true skill emerges from the marriage of effort and surrender, that mastery involves becoming one with one's tools rather than fighting against them. These insights emerged from thousands of years of archery practice and continue to inform human approaches to excellence in every field. The space engineers who calculate trajectories for interplanetary missions apply mathematical principles first explored by archers trying to understand how arrows behave in flight. The precision manufacturing techniques that make modern electronics possible evolved from quality control methods first developed to ensure that arrows would perform consistently. The team coordination methods used in modern corporations often reflect organizational principles, first worked out by military commanders trying to coordinate the fire of large archer formations. The supply chain management systems that keep global commerce functioning evolved from logistics techniques first developed to keep archer units supplied with arrows in the field. Even the user interface design, principles that make modern technology accessible and intuitive, often reflect insights about human-tool interaction first developed through archery practice. The idea that the best interfaces are those that become transparent to the user, that allow intention to flow directly into action without conscious mediation, can be traced back to the archer's goal of becoming one with their weapon. In the realm of education, the bow's legacy is particularly strong. The understanding that true learning requires not just the transmission of information, but the development of integrated skill, not just knowledge, but wisdom, not just practice, but understanding. These insights shaped educational approaches that persist today. The concept of apprenticeship, where students learn through patient practice under the guidance of master teachers, was refined through thousands of years of archery instruction. The understanding that mastery cannot be rushed, that it requires time for knowledge to be integrated into intuitive understanding, emerged from the recognition that becoming an effective archer required years of dedicated practice. The idea that the best teachers are those who can adapt their instruction to the individual needs and capabilities of each student was developed through archery training, where masters learned that different students required different approaches to achieve the same ultimate goal of accurate, consistent shooting. Perhaps most importantly, the Bao established the understanding that education at its best is not about filling passive vessels with information, but about awakening capabilities that already exist within students. The archer was not created by the teacher, but awakened by the teaching, guided to discover and develop potential that was always present but needed cultivation to manifest. This educational philosophy continues to influence progressive approaches to learning and development today. The recognition that true education must engage the whole person, mind, body, and spirit, that it must develop not just technical skills, but wisdom and character, can be traced back to archery traditions that understood the bow as a tool for complete human development. In our digital age, the bow's principles have found unexpected new expressions. Video game designers creating experiences that engage players without overwhelming them apply the same understanding of human psychology that archery masters developed over millennia. The knowledge that growth requires challenge, that mastery emerges from the balance between effort and ability, that the most satisfying achievements are those that require genuine skill while remaining achievable through dedicated practice. Virtual reality systems that feel natural and intuitive employ the same principles that made the bow such an effective teacher. The best VR experiences are those that become transparent to the user, where the technology disappears and intention flows directly into action, exactly the state that archers sought to achieve with their weapons. Motion capture technology used in filmmaking often employs archery as a benchmark for natural human movement. The archer's draw and release represents one of the most complex coordinated actions the human body can perform, requiring precise timing of multiple muscle groups while maintaining overall fluidity and grace. Even artificial intelligence systems reflect principles first discovered through archery practice. Machine learning algorithms that improve through repetition mirror the way archers developed skill through thousands of practice shots. The feedback loops that allow AI systems to learn from mistakes and gradually improve performance are essentially digital versions of the self-correction mechanisms that archers developed to refine their technique. The process of adjusting aim based on where previous arrows landed, of modifying technique based on results, became a template for how machines could be taught to learn from experience. Modern robotics engineers studying precision movement often return to archery as a model for how complex actions can be performed with both accuracy and grace. Industrial robots that manufacture everything from automobiles to smartphones employ control systems that mirror the way archers learn to coordinate multiple variables, force, timing, trajectory, environmental conditions to achieve consistent results. The emergence of competitive esports has created new forms of archery-like challenge that test the same fundamental skills that made archers formidable warriors. Professional gamers develop the same kind of focused attention, precise hand-eye coordination, and ability to perform under pressure that characterized the greatest archers in history. The reaction times and precision required for elite gaming performance often exceed what was demanded of historical archers. But perhaps most significantly, the bow and arrow has become a powerful metaphor for understanding human agency in an age of increasing automation. As machines become capable of performing more tasks that were once exclusively human, the archer's relationship with their bow offers a model for how humans can maintain meaningful control and purpose. The archer was never passive in relation to their weapon. Success required active engagement, continuous adjustment, and the development of integrated skill that could not be separated from the person who wielded the bow. This model suggests that the most valuable forms of human-technology interaction are those that require and reward human skill rather than making it obsolete. In the field of human-computer interaction, designers increasingly recognize that the most effective interfaces are those that work with rather than against natural human capabilities. Touchscreens that respond to gesture, voice recognition systems that adapt to individual speech patterns, and haptic feedback systems that provide tactile information all reflect the archery principle that the best tools are extensions of human capability rather than replacements for it. The mindfulness and meditation practices that have become popular in technology companies often draw explicitly from archery traditions. Tech workers struggling with information overload and constant connectivity find in archery practice a form of training that develops the kind of focused attention and present moment awareness that seems increasingly rare in digital environments. Olympic archery itself has been transformed by digital technology, with electronic scoring systems, high-speed cameras for technique analysis, and computer modeling of arrow flight. Yet the fundamental challenge remains unchanged. The archer must still draw the bow, aim carefully, and release at precisely the right moment. Technology enhances the sport, but cannot replace the human skills at its core. The data analytics revolution that has transformed everything from business to sports often employs visualization techniques that descend from archery practice. The ability to see patterns in complex data, to identify targets of opportunity, to aim strategic interventions with precision. These skills reflect the same visual spatial intelligence that archers developed through centuries of practice. Even the user experience design principles that make modern software accessible and intuitive often reflect insights first developed through archery instruction. The understanding that complex skills must be broken down into manageable components, that practice must be structured to build progressively toward mastery, that feedback must be immediate and clear. These principles were refined through archery teaching long before they were applied to digital education platforms. The gamification techniques used to make learning and behavior change more engaging frequently employ archery metaphors and mechanics. Progress bars that fill as users advance toward goals, achievement systems that reward precision and consistency, and difficulty curves that maintain optimal challenge levels all reflect principles first discovered through archery practice. In the realm of cybersecurity, the concept of targeted attacks employs archery metaphors to describe how digital threats are aimed with precision at specific vulnerabilities. Security professionals speak of attack vectors and use penetration testing techniques that mirror the way archers learn to find weak points in enemy defenses. The project management methodologies that coordinate complex technological development often reflect organizational principles, first worked out by military commanders coordinating archer formations. Agile development practices that emphasize rapid iteration and continuous improvement mirror the way archers refine their technique through constant practice and adjustment. Even the recommendation algorithms that suggest content on social media platforms employ targeting principles that would be familiar to ancient archers. The ability to predict user behavior and deliver precisely aimed content reflects the same understanding of psychology and probability that allowed skilled archers to anticipate where moving targets would be when their arrows arrived. The virtual and augmented reality training systems used to teach everything from surgery to space exploration often incorporate archery-like challenges to develop the hand-eye coordination and spatial awareness required for complex technical tasks. The fundamental skills that made someone an effective archer, precise control, depth perception, timing, and the ability to coordinate multiple variables simultaneously, remain valuable in technological contexts that would have been unimaginable to ancient practitioners. Perhaps most importantly, the bow and arrow offers a model for how humans can maintain dignity and purpose in relationship with increasingly powerful technologies. The archer was never diminished by their weapon, but enhanced by it. The bow required human skill to function effectively and rewarded that skill with capabilities that exceeded what was possible through unaided effort. This model suggests pathways for human development in technological societies that emphasize collaboration rather than competition between human and artificial intelligence. Just as the archer and bow formed an integrated system that was more capable than either component alone, humans and AI might develop partnerships that enhance rather than replace human capability. The patience and long-term perspective required for archery mastery offer valuable lessons for navigating technological change that often seems to accelerate beyond human comprehension. The archer's understanding that true skill develops gradually through sustained practice provides a counterbalance to digital culture's emphasis on instant gratification and rapid obsolescence. Most fundamentally, archery reminds us that some forms of human capability cannot be digitized or automated away. The integration of mind and body, the development of intuitive understanding through practice, the cultivation of character through patient effort, these aspects of human development remain as relevant today as they were 70,000 years ago. In every line of code that requires human creativity to write, every user interface that must account for human psychology to function effectively, every AI system that needs human oversight to operate ethically, we see echoes of the archer's ancient wisdom, that the most powerful technologies are those that amplify rather than replace human capability, that require rather than eliminate human skill, that enhance rather than diminish human agency and meaning. The digital age has not made the bow obsolete, but has revealed new contexts in which its fundamental principles remain relevant. As we continue to navigate the challenges and opportunities of technological advancement, we can still learn from the ancient archers' patient pursuit of mastery. Their integration of mind and body in service of clear intention, and their understanding that true capability emerges from the marriage of human wisdom with properly designed tools. The song of the bowstring continues to echo through our silicon dreams, reminding us that no matter how sophisticated our technologies become, they will always require human skill, wisdom, and intention to achieve their highest potential. In every algorithm that serves human purposes, every interface that enhances human capability, every system that amplifies rather than replaces human intelligence, we hear the continuing music of that ancient partnership between human intention and technological possibility. And so, the story of the bow and arrow reveals itself as something far more than the history of a single weapon. It is the story of human potential itself, the account of how our species learned to reach beyond its grasp, to achieve the seemingly impossible, through intelligence, persistence, and the accumulated wisdom of countless generations working together across time. From those first experiments in African caves to the precision-guided systems of our digital age, the principles remain the same. Patient practice leads to mastery. Understanding materials allows us to harness their properties. Systematic refinement transforms simple ideas into sophisticated capabilities. And most importantly, the marriage of human wisdom with well-designed tools can achieve results that seem impossible when measured against our apparent limitations. The bow taught us that we are not bound by the constraints we inherit, but empowered by the possibilities we can imagine, and the dedication we bring to making those possibilities real. This lesson echoes still through every innovation, every breakthrough, every moment when human intelligence transforms the impossible into the inevitable. As we face our own technological challenges, As we work to master new skills, as we seek to extend our capabilities beyond their current limits, we walk paths first traced by that unknown archer in ancient Africa who looked at a bent stick and saw the future. The weapon that built empires continues to teach us that human potential is limited only by our willingness to learn, to practice, and to persist in the face of apparent impossibility. The song of the string never really ended. It just learned to sing in new keys, to harmonize with new instruments, to carry its ancient wisdom into futures that its creators could never have imagined. And in that continuing song, we hear not just the history of a weapon, but the promise of human possibility itself. Always reaching, always learning, always becoming something more than what we thought possible. Human ingenuity, once unleashed, has no limits. The bow and arrow proved that 70,000 years ago, and it's proving it still in every innovation that extends our reach, in every skill that transforms limitation into capability, in every moment when we refuse to accept the boundaries that seem to define us and instead choose to transcend them through patience, wisdom, and the accumulated knowledge of all who came before. The age of the archer may be over, but the age of human potential has only just begun. The age of the archer may be over, but the age of human potential has only just begun. And yet, as we stand at the threshold of understanding what the bow and arrow truly accomplished, we must confront a more complex truth. This wasn't just a story of triumph. It was a story of transformation that came with costs we're still calculating today. Because when humanity learned to kill at distance, we didn't just change how we hunted, we fundamentally altered the relationship between intention and consequence, between the actor and the acted upon. Consider what happened to warfare itself once the bow became widespread. For most of human existence, violence had been intimate, immediate, personal. When you killed with a spear or club, you looked into your enemy's eyes, you felt their breath, heard their last words, carried the weight of their death in your hands. There was no escaping the reality of what you were doing. The bow changed that calculus forever. Suddenly, death could be delivered from shadows, from distances where the target became abstract, almost theoretical. The archer could loose an arrow and never see the face of the person it struck down. This wasn't just technological advancement. It was the birth of detached killing, the first step toward a world where violence could be sanitized, bureaucratized, reduced to a matter of technique rather than moral weight. This transformation rippled through every aspect of human society in ways that we're only beginning to understand. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe and Asia shows a dramatic shift in settlement patterns once bow technology became widespread. Villages that had existed peacefully for centuries suddenly sprouted defensive walls. Trade routes that had operated on trust and mutual benefit became militarized corridors, patrolled by armed guards. The bow didn't just change how wars were fought, it changed who could fight them. Traditional warrior cultures, built around physical strength and personal courage, found themselves suddenly vulnerable to enemies they couldn't even see. A single archer hidden in the forest could terrorize entire communities, disrupting trade, forcing people to abandon their homes, turning the landscape itself into a weapon. But perhaps most profoundly, the bow altered human psychology in ways that persist to this day. Once we learned that intention could manifest at distance, that human will could reach across space to reshape reality, everything else became possible. The same mental leap that allowed the first archer to envision an arrow flying true to its target eventually gave us long-range planning, abstract thinking, the ability to conceive of consequences that might not manifest for years or decades. Or this cognitive revolution wasn't limited to warfare. The bow taught us that effects could be separated from causes by vast distances in both space and time. A decision made in one place could have consequences in another. An action taken today could reshape tomorrow. This understanding became fundamental to everything from agriculture to astronomy, from architecture to philosophy. The mathematical concepts required for accurate archery, trajectory calculation, wind compensation, range estimation, these weren't just practical skills. They were the foundation stones of physics, engineering, and scientific thinking itself. When ancient mathematicians first began describing parabolic curves, they were building on knowledge accumulated through millennia of archery practice. The Greeks called it ballistics, the science of projectile motion. But that science began with nameless archers learning through trial and error how arrows behave in flight. Every modern calculation of orbital mechanics, every satellite launched into space, every missile guidance system traces its intellectual lineage back to those first careful observations of how bent wood could fling sharpened sticks across impossible distances. The bow also introduced humanity to its first taste of mass production and quality control. As kingdoms began fielding thousands of archers, they needed thousands of arrows, all manufactured to identical specifications. A slight variation in weight or fletching could mean the difference between victory and defeat when arrows were loosed in coordinated volleys. This drove the development of standardized manufacturing processes that would later be applied to everything from pottery to coinage to the industrial machinery that built the modern world. The concept of interchangeable parts, so crucial to mass production, was first worked out in medieval arrow factories, where fletchers learned to create projectiles so uniform that an archer could use any arrow from the supply and expect identical performance. The economic implications were staggering. Entire regions reorganized themselves around archery production. The English countryside became a vast network of yew groves, carefully managed to produce the specific wood needed for longbows. Italian city-states specialized in crossbow manufacturing, developing banking systems to finance the enormous capital investments required. Trade routes shifted to accommodate the flow of raw materials needed to support archery-based military systems. But with this economic transformation came new forms of inequality and exploitation. The bow may have been a democratic weapon in terms of who could learn to use it, but the systems required to support mass archery were anything but democratic. Vast numbers of people found themselves reduced to components in military-industrial machines designed to produce instruments of death. Forests were stripped bare to provide wood for bows. Entire species of birds were hunted to near extinction to provide feathers for fletching. Mining operations expanded to extract the metals needed for arrowheads. The environmental costs of maintaining archery-based militaries were enormous, setting precedents for the kind of ecological destruction that would characterize later industrial development. The social costs were equally severe. As archery became professionalized, traditional communities found themselves disrupted by the demands of military recruitment and training. Young men were pulled away from farming and crafts to spend years learning to shoot. Women found themselves bearing increased burdens as male labor was diverted to military purposes. The psychological toll was perhaps most severe of all. Communities that had lived for generations without experiencing organized violence suddenly found themselves caught up in conflicts driven by the capabilities that archery made possible. Wars could now be fought across greater distances for longer periods with more devastating effects than had ever been possible before. The bow had given humanity a terrible gift, the power to kill without consequence, to destroy without personal cost, to wage war without having to look into the eyes of those we were destroying. This wasn't progress in any moral sense. It was simply change, transformation that came with costs that are still being paid today. And yet, even as we acknowledge these darker implications, we cannot escape the fact that the bow also opened doorways to possibilities that have enriched human existence in countless ways. The same precision that made arrows deadly also made them tools of art, sport, meditation, and personal development. The same systematic thinking that optimized killing efficiency also gave us science engineering, and the technological capabilities that define modern life. The bow taught us that human potential is not fixed by biology or circumstance, but can be extended through intelligence, practice, and the systematic application of accumulated knowledge. This lesson has applications far beyond warfare. Every time we learn a new skill, master a complex task, or achieve something that once seemed impossible, we're drawing on insights first developed through archery practice. The modern surgeon, who performs delicate operations requiring millimeter precision, is applying hand-eye coordination principles first worked out by ancient archers. The athlete who trains for years to achieve peak performance follows training methodologies that can be traced back to archery masters who understood the relationship between practice and capability. The engineer who designs systems that must function reliably under stress uses materials, science knowledge first accumulated through bow construction. The teacher who helps students develop complex skills employs pedagogical methods refined through centuries of archery instruction. Even our approaches to artificial intelligence and machine learning reflect principles first discovered through archery. The concept of iterative improvement through feedback, the understanding that complex skills emerge from the coordination of multiple simple components, the recognition that true mastery requires not just mechanical precision, but adaptive intelligence. All of these insights were first systematically explored through the pursuit of archery excellence. The bow also established patterns of innovation that continue to drive technological development. The process of taking a simple natural phenomenon and gradually refining it into a sophisticated system through patient experimentation became a template for human progress in every field. This methodical approach to improvement, this willingness to invest decades or centuries in gradually perfecting a single concept, remains fundamental to how we approach complex challenges today. Consider how pharmaceutical companies develop new medicines through years of careful testing and refinement, how software engineers debug complex programs through systematic analysis and improvement, how athletes train for Olympic competition through repetitive practice designed to optimize performance in minute increments. All of these approaches reflect the archery principle that extraordinary results emerge from patient, systematic effort applied consistently over time. The bow also taught us about the relationship between individual excellence and collective capability. A single skilled archer was formidable, but a formation of coordinated archers was transformative. This understanding of how individual competence aggregates into system-level capability has become fundamental to modern organizational theory, military doctrine, and technological development. Every modern corporation that achieves competitive advantage through the coordinated efforts of skilled specialists, every military unit that functions as an integrated system rather than a collection of individuals, every technological project that succeeds through the collaboration of diverse experts reflects organizational principles, first worked out through the management of archer formations. But perhaps most importantly, the bow and arrow established the understanding that human beings are not passive victims of circumstance, but active agents capable of reshaping their environment to serve their purposes. This may seem obvious to us now, but it represented a revolutionary insight when it first emerged. For millions of years, human ancestors had adapted to their environment through biological evolution, developing better teeth for processing food, more efficient locomotion for covering distance, larger brains for processing information. The bow represented something entirely different. Instead of changing ourselves to fit the world, we began changing the world to fit ourselves. This shift from adaptation to manipulation marks one of the most significant transitions in human history. Once we learned that we could store energy in bent wood and release it through engineered projectiles, everything else became possible. Agriculture, architecture, metallurgy, All the technologies that define civilization grew from the same fundamental insight: that human intelligence could be applied systematically to transform natural materials into tools that extended our capabilities beyond their biological limits. The implications continue to unfold today as we grapple with technologies that seem to exceed human comprehension. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, quantum computing, these developments can seem alien and threatening, but they're actually extensions of the same process that began with the first bent stick and taut string. They represent human intelligence applied to materials and forces that previous generations couldn't even perceive, let alone manipulate. The bow reminds us that we've been down this path before, that every transformative technology initially seems magical, impossible, potentially dangerous, but that with patience, systematic study, and careful application, even the most complex innovations can be harnessed to serve human purposes. This doesn't mean we should be cavalier about the risks posed by advanced technologies. The bow's history teaches us that powerful capabilities always come with corresponding responsibilities. The same precision that could bring down a deer could also kill a human being. The same organizational methods that could coordinate hunting parties could also enable systematic warfare. As we develop technologies that could reshape the fundamental nature of human existence, we need the wisdom that comes from understanding how previous innovations have transformed our species. The bow's 70,000-year journey from hunting tool to spiritual discipline offers lessons about how technologies evolve, how they interact with human psychology and social organization, and how they can be guided toward beneficial rather than destructive applications. The story of the bow and arrow is ultimately a story about choice. At every stage of its development, human beings made decisions about how to apply their growing capabilities. They chose to develop more efficient hunting methods, more effective military tactics, more sophisticated manufacturing processes, but they also chose to explore the bow's potential as a tool for meditation, artistic expression, and personal development. These choices weren't made by abstract forces of historical inevitability. They were made by individual human beings, people with names and faces and families who saw possibilities in their circumstances and acted to realize those possibilities. The anonymous African who first bent a stick and attached a string made a choice. The medieval English longbowman who spent years perfecting his aim made a choice. The Japanese Kyudo master who used archery to cultivate spiritual awareness made a choice. Each of these choices contributed to the accumulated body of knowledge and capability that defines human civilization. Each represented a small act of faith that patient effort applied systematically over time could achieve results that seemed impossible from the perspective of immediate circumstances. This pattern continues today as we face challenges that seem to exceed our current capabilities. Climate change, poverty, disease, the risks posed by emerging technologies, these problems can seem insurmountable when viewed from the perspective of individual action or short-term thinking. But the bow's history suggests a different approach. Instead of seeking immediate solutions or waiting for miraculous breakthroughs, we can apply the archer's methodology: patient practice, systematic refinement, gradual accumulation of knowledge and capability. The understanding that extraordinary results emerge not from sudden inspiration, but from sustained effort, guided by accumulated wisdom. The first archer didn't solve the problem of distance killing in a single moment of genius. They began with crude experiments, failed repeatedly, refined their approach based on results, and gradually developed capabilities that their contemporaries found miraculous. This same process, applied to our contemporary challenges, offers hope that problems that seem impossible today might yield to patient, systematic effort applied consistently over time. The bow also reminds us that the most important innovations are often the simplest ones, at least in their initial form. The first bow was just a bent stick and a piece of string. But embedded within that simple combination was the potential for everything that followed. Military tactics, precision manufacturing, mathematical physics, organizational theory, all emerged from that basic insight about storing and releasing energy. This suggests that solutions to our current challenges might also emerge from simple beginnings that seem insignificant when viewed in isolation. A new way of thinking about a problem, a small improvement in an existing process, a different approach to coordinating human effort. These modest innovations might contain the seeds of transformative change. The bow's legacy is not just the accumulated knowledge and capability it produced, but the methodology it established for human problem solving. The understanding that complex challenges yield to systematic effort, that individual excellence aggregates into collective capability, that simple principles can be refined into sophisticated applications through patient practice. As we stand at the threshold of technologies that could reshape the fundamental nature of human existence, we carry with us the wisdom accumulated through 70,000 years of archery development, not as a burden or limitation, but as a resource, a source of insight about how human beings can successfully navigate transformative change while remaining true to their essential nature. The song of the bowstring continues to echo through human consciousness, reminding us that we are not bound by the limitations we inherit, but empowered by the possibilities we can imagine and the dedication we bring to realizing those possibilities. In every innovation that extends human capability, in every skill that transforms limitation into strength, in every moment when patient practice yields extraordinary results, we hear the continuing music of that ancient partnership between human intelligence and the material world. The weapon that built empires has become something far greater than its creators could have imagined. It has become a teacher, showing us not just what we can accomplish, but how we can accomplish it. The methodology of patience, precision, and systematic refinement that produced the first true arrow continues to guide human development in contexts that would have seemed magical to those first African archers. And in that continuity, in that persistence of principle across vast spans of time and technological change, we find reason for optimism about our species' ability to navigate whatever challenges await us. The same intelligence that transformed bent wood into instruments of precision can surely find ways to apply our growing capabilities to purposes worthy of the wisdom we've accumulated along the way. The bow taught us how to reach beyond our grasp. Now, it's teaching us how to use that reach responsibly, with the understanding that true power lies not in the ability to impose our will upon the world, but in the wisdom to know when and how to apply our capabilities in service of purposes larger than ourselves. Human potential, once unleashed, knows no bounds. The bow and arrow proved that 70,000 years ago and continues to prove it every day, in every innovation that transforms impossibility into inevitability through the patient application of accumulated human wisdom. The age of the archer may be over, but the age of human possibility has only just begun. And the song continues, waiting for the next generation of innovators to learn its ancient melody and find new ways to make it sing. Human ingenuity, once awakened, echoes through eternity. The bow and arrow was just the beginning. Human ingenuity, once awakened, echoes through eternity. But as we trace the bow's influence into our contemporary world, we discover something remarkable happening. The weapon that once defined the cutting edge of military technology has undergone perhaps its most surprising transformation yet. It has become a bridge between our digital future and our deepest human nature. Walk into any major technology company today, from Silicon Valley startups to established corporations, and you'll find something unexpected in their wellness programs and stress management initiatives. Archery ranges, meditation spaces where employees learn traditional Kudo techniques, team-building exercises based on coordinated shooting drills that mirror the organizational challenges of managing complex software development projects. This isn't just corporate trendy following the latest management fad. It's recognition of something profound that our ancestors understood intuitively. The bow teaches lessons about focus, precision, and systematic improvement that remain as relevant in the age of artificial intelligence as they were in the caves of ancient Africa. Consider the software engineer debugging a complex program. They faced the same fundamental challenge that confronted every archer in history. How do you identify the precise source of a problem among countless variables? How do you maintain concentration under pressure when a single mistake can cascade through an entire system? How do you develop the kind of intuitive understanding that allows you to sense where problems might emerge before they become critical failures? The methodologies are remarkably similar. Both require the ability to break down complex challenges into manageable components, to test hypotheses through systematic experimentation, to learn from failures and adjust approach based on results. The patience required to perfect a single line of code mirrors the patience required to perfect a single shot. The satisfaction of finally achieving elegant functionality parallels the satisfaction of watching an arrow fly true to its target. But the parallels go deeper than mere methodology. The bow is teaching us crucial lessons about maintaining human agency in an age of increasing automation. As artificial intelligence systems become more sophisticated, as robots take over more manual labor, as algorithms make more decisions that affect our daily lives, we face a fundamental question about the future of human capability and purpose. The archer's relationship with their bow offers a compelling model for how this future might unfold. The bow never made the archer obsolete. Instead, it amplified human capability in ways that required and rewarded skill, practice, and wisdom. The most effective archers weren't those who simply operated their weapons mechanically, but those who developed such deep understanding of their tools that they became integrated systems, human and bow, working in perfect harmony. This suggests pathways for human development in technological societies that emphasize collaboration rather than replacement. The best outcomes emerge when human intelligence partners with technological capability, each contributing what it does best, each enhanced by the other's strengths. We see this principle already operating in fields from medical diagnosis to financial analysis to creative endeavors. The most effective radiologists aren't being replaced by AI diagnostic systems. They're learning to work with those systems, using artificial intelligence to process vast amounts of data while applying human judgment to interpret results in context, to consider factors that algorithms might miss, to make decisions that require ethical reasoning and empathetic understanding. The most successful financial analysts aren't being eliminated by algorithmic trading systems. They're learning to use those systems as tools that can process information at superhuman speeds while reserving for themselves the strategic thinking, pattern recognition, and creative problem-solving that remain uniquely human capabilities. Even in creative fields, we're seeing artists, musicians, and writers learning to collaborate with AI systems that can generate content, suggest possibilities, and handle routine tasks, while humans focus on the vision, meaning, and emotional resonance that give creative work its power to move and inspire. The bow's 70,000-year journey offers wisdom for navigating this collaboration. It reminds us that the most powerful technologies are often those that enhance rather than replace human capability, that require human skill to function effectively, that reward rather than eliminate the need for practice and mastery. The implications extend beyond individual career choices to fundamental questions about education, social organization, and human development. If we're moving toward a world where humans and AI systems work in partnership, we need educational approaches that develop the kinds of capabilities that complement rather than compete with artificial intelligence. This means cultivating skills that the bow has always taught. The ability to maintain focused attention in distracting environments. The capacity for sustained practice aimed at gradual improvement rather than instant gratification. The integration of mind and body that allows for intuitive responses to complex situations. The wisdom to know when to act and when to wait, when to apply force and when to yield. These capabilities can't be programmed into machines because they emerge from the lived experience of being human, from having a body that moves through space, emotions that respond to circumstances, relationships that create meaning and purpose. They require the kind of integrated understanding that develops through practice, reflection, and the accumulation of wisdom over time. The bow also teaches us about the importance of maintaining craft traditions, skills and knowledge that are passed down through direct human contact rather than digital transmission. There's something irreplaceable about learning to make arrows by hand, about understanding how wood behaves under stress, about developing the muscle memory that allows accurate shooting without conscious thought. These traditional skills aren't just historical curiosities. They're repositories of knowledge about materials, processes, and human capability that might prove crucial as we navigate an uncertain technological future. They represent ways of knowing that complement and enrich our digital capabilities rather than competing with them. Moreover, the practice of traditional archery offers a form of meditation and mindfulness training that seems increasingly valuable in our hyper-connected world. The requirement for complete presence, for shutting out distractions and focusing entirely on the immediate task, provides a counterbalance to the fragmented attention that characterizes much of modern life. The bow teaches patience in an age of instant gratification, precision in an age of approximation, mindful presence in an age of digital distraction. These aren't just personal benefits. They're capabilities that our technological society desperately needs as we grapple with challenges that require sustained attention, careful thinking, and wise judgment, rather than quick reactions and immediate solutions. Climate change, for instance, requires the kind of long-term thinking and patient effort that archery practice develops. Solutions won't emerge from sudden breakthroughs or technological fixes alone, but from the systematic application of knowledge and effort over decades. The archer's understanding that mastery emerges from sustained practice rather than dramatic gestures offers a model for approaching such challenges. The development of artificial intelligence itself requires the kind of careful, systematic approach that characterizes traditional archery training. We're dealing with forces that could reshape the fundamental nature of human existence, and we need the wisdom to develop and apply these capabilities responsibly. The bow's history reminds us that powerful technologies require not just technical skill, but ethical reasoning, cultural understanding, and deep wisdom about human nature and social organization. As we stand at the threshold of artificial general intelligence, as we grapple with the implications of genetic engineering, as we explore the possibilities of quantum computing and nanotechnology, we need the kind of integrated understanding that emerges from traditions like archery that have been refining human capability for thousands of years. The bow offers more than just historical perspective. It offers a methodology for approaching transformative change, a way of thinking about the relationship between human capability and technological possibility that emphasizes partnership rather than competition, enhancement rather than replacement, wisdom rather than mere efficiency. This doesn't mean rejecting technological advancement or retreating into nostalgia for simpler times. It means approaching the future with the same kind of systematic patience and careful attention that produced the first successful arrow flight 70,000 years ago. It means recognizing that the most important innovations often emerge not from sudden breakthroughs, but from the gradual refinement of simple principles through sustained effort and accumulated wisdom. The bow reminds us that Human potential is not fixed by current circumstances, but can be extended indefinitely through intelligence, practice, and the systematic application of accumulated knowledge. This lesson remains as relevant today as it was in ancient Africa, perhaps more so as we face challenges that seem to exceed our current capabilities. Every time we learn a new skill, every time we push beyond apparent limitations, every time we achieve something that once seemed impossible, we follow paths first traced by those anonymous archers who refused to accept that distance killing was beyond human capability. Their legacy lives on not just in the technologies they inspired, but in the methodology they established for approaching seemingly impossible challenges with patience, systematic effort, and the accumulated wisdom of all who came before. The weapon that built empires has become a teacher for the digital age, offering lessons about focus, precision, and the patient pursuit of excellence that remain as valuable today as they were 70,000 years ago. In every line of code that requires human creativity, in every AI system that needs human oversight, in every technological challenge that demands not just computational power, but wisdom and judgment, we see the continuing relevance of the archer's ancient art. The bow's song continues to echo through human consciousness, reminding us that true technological mastery requires not just understanding how tools work, but wisdom about how to use them in service of purposes worthy of our highest aspirations. As we stand at the beginning of what may be the most transformative period in human history, we carry with us the accumulated wisdom of 70,000 years of archery development. Not as a burden, but as a source of insight about how human beings can successfully navigate transformative change while remaining true to their essential nature. The age of the archer may be over, but the archer's wisdom has never been more relevant. The future belongs not to humans or machines alone, but to the partnerships we create between human wisdom and technological capability. And in those partnerships, in that ongoing collaboration between ancient wisdom and cutting-edge innovation, we hear the continuing song of human potential, always reaching, always learning, always becoming something more than what seemed possible. Human ingenuity, once awakened, echoes through eternity. The bow and arrow was just the beginning, and the symphony it started is far from finished. The next movement is about to begin, and we are all its composers. Human ingenuity, once awakened, echoes through eternity. And as we reach the end of our journey through 70,000 years of archery history, we find ourselves standing at a remarkable convergence point. The weapon that emerged from African caves has become something its creators could never have imagined. A teacher, a meditation tool, a bridge between ancient wisdom and digital futures, and ultimately, a mirror reflecting the deepest truths about human potential itself. But perhaps the most profound lesson the bow offers us is about the nature of legacy itself. Every innovation, every breakthrough, every moment of human creativity builds upon the accumulated wisdom of all who came before. The smartphone in your pocket, the satellite systems that guide our navigation, the artificial intelligence that processes our queries, all of these technologies trace their intellectual DNA back to that first moment when someone looked at a bent stick and imagined possibility. This isn't just historical curiosity. It's a fundamental truth about how human knowledge develops and spreads. We don't innovate in isolation. We stand on the shoulders of countless generations of experimenters, dreamers, and problem solvers who refuse to accept limitations as permanent. The bow reminds us that we are all part of an unbroken chain of human creativity, stretching back to the earliest glimmers of consciousness and forward into futures we can barely imagine. That responsibility can feel overwhelming, but it's also profoundly inspiring. Every skill we develop, every problem we solve, every moment when we push beyond apparent limitations, every skill we develop, every problem we solve, every moment when we push beyond what seems possible, we contribute to that ongoing conversation between human intelligence and the material world. We add our voices to the chorus that began when the first archer drew back their bowstring and heard its song for the very first time. The children learning archery today in school programs and summer camps aren't just developing hand-eye coordination or learning a recreational skill. They're connecting themselves to the longest continuous tradition of human technological development in our species' history. They're learning lessons about patience, precision, and the systematic pursuit of excellence that will serve them whether they become software engineers, surgeons, artists, or anything else they choose to pursue. The executives taking mindfulness breaks on corporate archery ranges aren't just managing stress or improving focus. They're tapping into wisdom about sustained attention and purposeful action that was refined over millennia by people who understood that success requires not just technical skill, but mental clarity and emotional balance. The researchers using archery as a model for human-machine interfaces aren't just solving engineering problems. They're exploring fundamental questions about how consciousness relates to action, how intention manifests in the physical world, how human beings can maintain agency and purpose in relationship with increasingly sophisticated technologies. All of these contemporary applications point to the same essential truth. The bow and arrow was never just a weapon. It was humanity's first systematic exploration of what becomes possible when intelligence, patience, and accumulated wisdom are applied to apparently impossible challenges. The principles it established continue to operate in every field of human endeavor. And this brings us to perhaps the most important question of all. What happens next if the bow's influence has been this profound and this enduring? What does that tell us about our species' capacity to navigate the challenges that lie ahead? The answer, I believe, lies in understanding that we are not passive observers of technological change but active participants in shaping how that change unfolds. Just as countless generations of archers refined and improved their art through patient practice and careful observation, we have the opportunity and responsibility to guide the development of our emerging technologies toward beneficial rather than destructive applications. The artificial intelligence systems being developed today will be shaped by the values, priorities, and wisdom of the people who create and deploy them. The genetic engineering techniques that could reshape the fundamental nature of biological existence will be guided by our understanding of ethics, responsibility, and human flourishing. The quantum computers and nanotechnology systems that might solve problems we can't currently imagine will reflect the intentions and judgment of their creators. In each case, the bow's methodology remains relevant: patient experimentation, systematic refinement, careful attention to consequences, and above all, the wisdom to recognize that true power lies not in the ability to impose our will upon the world, but in understanding how to work with natural forces to achieve purposes worthy of our highest aspirations. The 70,000-year journey from that first bent stick to today's precision, manufacturing, and digital interfaces has taught us that human potential is essentially unlimited when guided by accumulated wisdom and applied with systematic patience. But it has also taught us that every capability comes with corresponding responsibilities, that power without wisdom leads to destruction rather than creation. As we stand at the threshold of capabilities that would have seemed magical to previous generations, we carry with us not just the tools and techniques accumulated through millennia of human development, but the wisdom about how to use those capabilities responsibly. The bow's history reminds us that the most important innovations are often those that enhance rather than replace human agency, that require and reward rather than eliminate the need for skill and wisdom. This doesn't mean we should fear technological advancement or resist change. It means we should approach the future with the same combination of ambition and humility that characterized the greatest archers in history. Bold enough to attempt what seems impossible, patient enough to develop capabilities through sustained effort, wise enough to consider consequences before acting, and humble enough to recognize that we are part of something much larger than ourselves. The weapon that built empires has become a teacher for ages yet to come. Its lessons about precision, patience, and the systematic pursuit of excellence will remain relevant as long as human beings seek to extend their capabilities beyond their apparent limitations. Its methodology of careful observation, systematic experimentation, and gradual refinement will continue to guide innovation in fields we haven't yet imagined. Most importantly, its fundamental message about human potential will continue to inspire generations of innovators, creators, and problem solvers who refuse to accept the boundaries that seem to constrain them. The bow reminds us that we are not limited by the circumstances we inherit, but empowered by the possibilities we can envision and the dedication we bring to realizing those possibilities. In quiet moments, when we need reminding of what our species is capable of achieving, we can listen for the echo of that ancient song. The whisper of string against wood, the flight of arrows through air, the patient pursuit of impossible precision by people who understood that true mastery emerges not from sudden inspiration, but from the accumulated wisdom of countless small improvements applied consistently over time. The age of the archer is over, but the archer's wisdom is eternal. It lives on in every innovation that transforms limitation into capability, in every skill that develops through patient practice, in every moment when human intelligence partners with technological possibility to achieve results that seemed impossible just moments before. Human potential, once recognized, knows no boundaries. The bow and arrow proved that 70,000 years ago. It continues to prove it today, and it will continue to prove it for as long as human beings refuse to accept limitations as permanent and choose instead to reach beyond their apparent grasp toward possibilities that await patient cultivation. The song of the string continues, waiting for the next generation of listeners to hear its ancient melody and find new ways to make it sing. The weapon that built empires has become something far greater, a testament to the unlimited potential that lies dormant within human consciousness, waiting to be awakened through patience, practice, and the accumulated wisdom of all who came before. That's the true legacy of the bow and arrow. Not the empires it built or the battles it won, but the understanding it established that human beings are not bound by the limitations they appear to inherit. We are empowered by the possibilities we can imagine and the dedication we bring to making those possibilities real. And that, bored people, is a song that will never end. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story. Hello, bored people, and welcome back to Muted History. Tonight we're stepping into the final chapter of a story that began in African caves 70,000 years ago. A story about how a simple, curved piece of wood didn't just change how we hunted or fought, but fundamentally rewired human consciousness itself. We've traced the bow's journey from those first experimental arrows to the great military formations that toppled empires. We've seen how it taught us precision, patience, and the systematic pursuit of impossible goals. But as we stand here in our digital age, surrounded by technologies that would seem magical to those first archers, we discover something remarkable. The bow's most profound legacy isn't found in museums or history books. It's alive and operating in ways that would astonish even the most visionary archer who ever drew a string. Walk into any Silicon Valley office today, and you'll find meditation rooms where tech workers practice traditional archery forms. Not because it's trendy, but because they've rediscovered what ancient practitioners always knew. The bow teaches something that no algorithm can replicate. It teaches the integration of mind and body, the patience to pursue gradual improvement over instant results, the wisdom to know when to hold tension and when to release it. The software engineer debugging complex code faces the same fundamental challenge as every archer in history. How do you maintain laser focus when surrounded by distractions? How do you break down an impossible problem into manageable components? How do you develop the intuitive understanding that lets you sense where failures might emerge before they cascade through an entire system? The methodology is identical. Both require systematic experimentation, learning from failure, adjusting approach based on results. The patience needed to perfect a single line of code mirrors the patience required to perfect a single shot. The satisfaction of elegant functionality parallels watching an arrow fly true to its mark. So as we close this chapter on humanity's first great technological revolution, remember this. The bow and arrow wasn't just a weapon that built empires. It was proof that human potential has no ceiling when guided by patience, practice, and the accumulated wisdom of those who came before us. From that first bent stick in an African cave to the precision-guided systems of tomorrow, the song of the string continues to echo through human consciousness, reminding us that we are not bound by the limitations we inherit, but empowered by the possibilities we dare to imagine and the dedication we bring to making them real. Human ingenuity, once awakened, echoes through eternity. The bow and arrow was just the beginning. Thanks for joining me on this journey through deep time, bored people. Until the next story, stay curious, stay calm,